Hello, friends. Welcome to the Gould Standard. I'm Brian Levine, and this is a podcast brought to you by the Glenn Gould Foundation. Every broadcast, we bring you fascinating conversations with some of the most remarkable people from all across the world of the arts. And today, we are absolutely thrilled, and I have to say this is a privilege, to be spending time with someone that I regard as one of the true heroes of music. Dr. Ahmad Sarmast is the founder of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. He helped to bring music back to his native country after it was banned by the Taliban. He created the first modern school of music in his country and managed to make a very important statement about the role of music in fostering justice, equality, and human development by making it a co-ed school with special places for young women, including an all-women's orchestra. Dr. Sarmast showed his courage as well as his contribution to musical culture when he faced down threats by the Taliban and survived a suicide bombing, which could very easily have taken his life. But that didn't deter him. After he recovered mostly from his injuries, he returned to continue the work of his school. And sadly, with the return of the Taliban in 2021, he and his students and his instructors were forced to flee the country, seeking refuge in Portugal, which has been a very hospitable host country for them, and they continue their work to this day. And what really moves and inspires me about Dr. Sarmast is not only his complete dedication and the work that he's done not only as a teacher but also as a musicologist to preserve the long and very beautiful traditions of musical culture in his country, but also the understanding that he has communicated around the world about the key role that music can have in promoting a better, more just, more humane, compassionate, and unified world. Dr. Sarmast, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure and honor to be with you today and to speak to you and to your audience.
I really am so interested and curious in knowing not only about the work that you did with ANIM, the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, but also your own musical origins and how you came to have this passion and complete dedication to music. It is a family tradition, isn't it?
I was born in the family of a musician, a conductor, and songwriter. He's very well known in Afghanistan. His name is Ustad Ahmad Sarmast. And that was his life story that gave me that strong belief in the power of music. He was very, very young when his father passed away, almost now 100 years ago. And his mother, who was an illiterate, and in that time there was not much available for a widow to take care of 4 kids. So she, in order to make sure that the kids have an education, he gave his 2 sons to an orphanage because she could not afford to look after them and to give them education and to provide them. Well, the necessity that a child needs to grow up healthy and have a future. So through this orphanage, my father was enrolled in the first music school, which has been created here within the Afghan army. And when his mother learned that he enrolled in a music program, because in that time still there was a stigma against music, and the society was extremely religious, and it was heavily impacted and influenced by religious leaders. So my father went to the military academy or to the music school directory to ask them to kick him out of the school, because she was saying that no one was a musician with our family, and his involvement in music going to bring disgrace to us. But the director was a kind of very smart man. Before making a decision and agreeing with my grandmother, he called the teachers and the principal of the school to see how he's doing, whether he has any future in music or no. But after learning that he is good, a big talent, and one day Afghanistan will be proud of him, they disagreed with my grandmother to remove the child from the school. So, but that story that how an orphan with no future through an orphanage who was enrolled in a music program managed to not only build a beautiful life for himself, but also to make a huge contribution to the music scene of Afghanistan. And today, when we are talking about Afghan music and the history of academic music in Afghanistan and also orchestral music in Afghanistan, we immediately come across his name. So that story give me that belief in the transformative power of music, that it can enormously help communities, young kids, children, yeah, and in a way also not only to transform them out, but also they give them a better future, but also connect them to the rest of the world, connect them better with the community.
If I'm not mistaken, the name or really title Ustad means master. So he obviously achieved great honor in the musical profession.
Yes, that's true because until 1990s, there was a special commission in the Ministry of Culture of Afghanistan. That's after some time when people were making a tangible impact on the arts and culture of Afghanistan, that this commission has been making a decision to award them this honorary title. And my father received this honorary title in 1974 after many years of composing, arranging, collecting folk music, arranging for a huge order, for a big orchestra, and actively contributing to the field of music in Afghanistan. So he has been granted that title.
Was he your teacher? Did he would give you your first music lessons?
He did not give me my very first lesson, but the life that was in our home and the number of musicians who was visiting our house to learn new pieces and practice them for him, that environment injected in me the love for music. But even when I finished my primary education, and the time was that I should got enrolled in a secondary education, I did not consult them originally, and I went to enroll in the music school myself. After I got enrolled in the music school there, then he wasn't my first teacher there, but after some time he was teaching me. I became member of the school orchestra, of which he was the conductor, but also he was teaching year training, solfege, and music theory, and all those subjects that I learned under his guidance with the rest of the student community and student body.
It's fascinating the way the spark was passed down to you. But obviously, you also lived through and have lived through and continue to live through some very, very turbulent times, including the Civil War and what followed it. Were you always in Afghanistan, or did you have to leave as you were, going through that period of history in your country?
I lived a good life in Afghanistan. I witnessed the good days of Afghanistan back in 1970s, 80s, until I was granted a scholarship to go and study abroad. I remember those beautiful days as well. And when I was like university students and the first music school, the music students, and then university students. And after the arrival or of the Russian army or the Soviet Union army to Afghanistan, Afghanistan was under huge sanction by the Western community. So the Afghan kids, Afghan young people, the only opportunity to study abroad or to get a better education, they had opportunities to travel to socialist countries, or the countries who was under the influence of the Soviet Union. So I was granted a scholarship to go and study for my music education. I ended up in Moscow, where I went first to a college for music, and then enrolled in Moscow Conservatorium, where I studied for composition and musicology. When I was ready to return back to Afghanistan in early 90s, the political situation changed in Afghanistan, but I could not go. It was the beginning of the time when music became a subject of discrimination. And also my education in the Soviet Union also made me a subject of discrimination by the new government who have been fighting against the Soviet Union for many years, and everyone who were educated in that country were kind of stamped as the KGB spies. So that discrimination against the beginning of repression against music and musician in early 1992 that eventually brought to the arrival of the Taliban in power in 1996 and the total ban of music were made me not to return back to Afghanistan and to stay abroad. But I could not stay abroad either in Moscow because Moscow was not a signatory of the International Migration Convention in that time. So I applied to several countries for political asylum, and eventually I was granted one by the Australian government. So I arrived to Australia in 1994 to learn that my degree from Moscow Conservatory does not mean anything in Australia, and it was not recognized, and I had to go back to school to get my degree and to prove that I can be useful to the Portuguese, to the Australian community. I went back to Monash University, began with my master degree, and then the result of my master degree was so good and so impactful that it has been decided by the academic board of the School of Music that I should upgrade it to a PhD. And in 2005, I finished my PhD in Australia.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were the first PhD in musicology in the history of Afghanistan.
I was the first Afghan with a PhD degree in music. Yes, not just musicology, generally a music-related field.
I'd like to sort of turn a little bit to the whole world, and it's a vast world, of the music of Afghanistan, because I'm sure that for many of our listeners, this will be a tradition that is unfamiliar with them. And certainly I've been trying to learn very quickly more about the music of your country. And one of the things that it strikes me is helpful for people to think about, maybe they should pull out an atlas, is geography. The number of countries that Afghanistan borders, Iran, Pakistan, China, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, which means that you're really a crossroads of a huge number of different cultures and traditions. And I think at one time Afghanistan was even on the Silk Road, way, way back, centuries ago. It seems to me that one way of beginning to get a feeling for the music is to understand that it is a bringing together of many, many musical traditions in a kind of a, either, I guess the American term would be a melting pot, but I think probably a mosaic might be the better way of describing it. Can you give us a little bit, for people who are coming to understand a little bit about the historical background of Afghan music, a bit of an understanding about what some of the elements and the different traditions are?
You clearly marked at the beginning that Afghanistan was an important center of the Silk Road. And for many, many centuries, musical ideas, cultural ideas, which have been penetrating from the north to the south to India and back from south to the India, they were going through some kind of filtration in Afghanistan before being passing to the next the destination. But at the same time, Afghanistan for centuries was part of those countries. The geographies that you currently named, that like Iran and Central Asian countries, like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and then Pakistan, and those big geographies, those boundaries did not exist for centuries. And for centuries, Afghanistan was part of the cultural and musical development, which is called Central Asia and also Iran, until 18th century, when the Indian musicians began to come into Afghanistan, and they've been brought and invited by the court of the Afghan rulers to Afghanistan. Afghanistan professional music, music was the same musical tradition that was played in Iran and in Central Asia and in a larger Muslim countries. But in 18th centuries, when the Pashtun rulers of Afghanistan come into power, they shifted their attention for building a government and building a state and and developing the culture from Iranian side to the more to the south, to India and the Indian Mughals. And that's the time that they began bringing musicians from India, but at the same time, huge part of North India, including up to Kashmir, it was part of Afghanistan. That is not any longer part of Afghanistan. Even some huge part of Pakistan, which is the northwestern frontier, it was also part of Afghanistan. And so Afghanistan was, in a way, sharing culture with the cultural ideas with this two at the beginning, mainly with the Iranian plateau, and then more shifted to the India. And when the Indian musicians to come to Afghanistan, the court became a kind of, as you put it, a mosaic of musical tradition from various parts in Afghanistan. But there was mainly three types of music presented in Afghan court. It was Hindustani music, mainly presented by dancing and singing girls and their musicians, and then the music from historical music, which we call it Khorasanian music, which was the musical tradition shaped by Afghan people with Central Asia and Iran. But at the same time, there was folk music of the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. So this is the three type of music that were coexisting. And as Afghanistan was moving, and then subsequent rulers of Afghanistan, like the family of King Zahir Shah, they were brought up in India, very much influenced by Indian culture and Indian music. And it's well known now that the Zahir Shah, the last king of Afghanistan, he was himself a trained musician with a great love to Hindustani music. He was knowledgeable about the raga. So then the Afghan court and then Radio Afghanistan patronized Hindustani music, and slowly the old tradition have been pushed away, even for in such a stronghold of those traditions like the city of Herat or northern part of Afghanistan. And eventually, the professional music of Afghanistan or the art music of Afghanistan became influenced by Hindustani music, raga and tala. That is the tradition is today used in the field of arts music in Afghanistan. But at the same time, Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic society. Every ethnic group, in addition that they're speaking different languages, they've got their own musical instruments, they have their own musical genres. It's a very rich, diverse musical tradition. But in the field of urban music or popular music of Afghanistan, that's something that has been closely influenced by Hindustani music or by North Indian music. But at the same time, it's a new type of music which has been created specially at Radio Afghanistan as a type of music that should be understood and or could be acceptable throughout Afghanistan. And in this music, you can see some elements of old tradition Persian or Iranian music, but at the same time, some elements of Hindustani music, some elements of Pashtun music. So that genre is a kind of a child of all those traditions together. While at the same time, we've got old traditions preserved in Nuristan and among the Pashai peoples in Probit of Badakhshan. It's believed that those musical traditions are intact for centuries and centuries. That as those parts of Afghanistan did not come in close contact with Arabs or with the Persian or then with the Hindustani musicians.
Oh, that is absolutely fascinating, and I see parallels with, certain, pieces of Western musical history as well. That there was a division between the music of the court, the music of the villages and the folk traditions, and that there were musical instruments and melodies and styles that existed, away from the main centers, where the people kept it alive, parents handing them down to their children, singing to them as lullabies or, at festivals and fairs and moments of celebration like weddings and so on. And that these two sort of grew up side by side. And there's always a kind of a danger that people will associate the country with only one of those traditions, that they both have to basically be understood and preserved to have a full understanding of the country's culture.
That's exactly when we are talking about Afghan music and people are the talking or Afghan scholar or Afghan journalist that the pure Afghan music. I always ask them, what's the pure Afghan music? What do you mean by the pure Afghan music? Afghanistan is a rich country, we are a very diverse country with many ethnic groups. Each of them have their own music. So which of those musical tradition or musical practice is the pure Afghan music? Or the classical, what we call it classical music, the art music of Afghanistan, which is mainly influenced by Hindustani music. But do we call this Afghan music, or do we call the popular music of Afghanistan Afghan music? So it's a very difficult task to identify something as pure Afghani music, especially given the fact that Afghanistan was in the crossroad of all those cultural ideas that have been moving from the north to the south and from the south to the north.
So there you go. Afghanistan was the first United Nations of music, in a way. But also, when we move into the 20th century, if my reading is correct, one of the big sort of pivotal moments was the arrival of radio, which began the development of a popular tradition.
Yes, the radio played a significant role in popularization of music as well as to make music accessible to wider communities, especially the arts music. Before the arrival of radio, the people enjoyed the music of village musicians, but when the radio was introduced at the beginning, it was mainly Hindustani music presented by those Afghan musicians of Indian descendants in Afghanistan, but that was also not understood by the majority, and that's the time that there's a necessity to form ensemble and orchestras for Afghanistan. The very first ensemble that was formed for Radio Afghanistan, it was called the Ensemble of Classical Music, but it was the ensemble of Hindustani music, which was made of some Afghan instruments, some Hindustani instruments. But the theoretical basis for the which ensemble, which is for this ensemble, which is being used, it was ragas and talas. But then the second ensemble that said that was employed to Radio Afghanistan, it's called Orchestra Number Two, but also known as jazz orchestra. But when I'm talking jazz orchestra, it's not jazz music. They called it art jazz orchestra because it was made of Western musical instruments, mainly used in jazz music, like trumpet and saxophone and drum kit and double bass and piano. And that's why it was called jazz music. But in reality, it had nothing to do with jazz about a part of those musical instruments. And this orchestra also, when it came first in the Radio Afghanistan, they did not have their own musical forms or musical genres to perform. Their repertoire at the beginning was mainly short, popular pieces of Europe, like some mazurkas or the well-known dances, or the very first song that was recorded in Afghanistan, it was La Palma, a very
Ah,
well-known Italian song. So you see, but eventually this is the time when it came to form a new ensemble, the new music. That slowly the new music when came into existence. This orchestra, alongside the classical orchestra of Afghanistan, with the two major musical ensemble that were providing entertainment to Afghan community, but also accompaniment to professional singer as well as to amateur singers. But this is just to eventually this two tradition was added another one, which was an ensemble of Afghan traditional instrument, which has been added to Radio Afghanistan. So this three ensemble existed side by side until late 60s, early 70s, when Radio Afghanistan, alongside Afghan film, they decided to focus on preservation and reviving of Afghan folk music. And that's the time that Radio Afghanistan decided to come with something huge. And they put all these three ensembles together and formed the large orchestra of Radio Afghanistan, which was made of some Western instruments, some Afghan local instruments, and some Hindustani music. And this orchestra that was conducted by my father. My father conducted and arranged music for this orchestra. And this orchestra kind of also served as a model for the subsequent orchestras that Afghanistan National Institute of Music funded its inception in 2010. And even today, the Afghan Youth Orchestra, while it's a full symphonic orchestra, but it also has Afghan traditional instrument in those makeup.
so again, I'm fascinated by musical instruments. Every time I go into a museum where there are hundreds or thousands of instruments, the first thing I wanted to do is smash the display cases and hear how they sound. But people who are discovering Afghan music, will find assume tablas and sitars for some of the music, but also indigenous instruments that really grew out of the villages and the folk traditions and so on. And it must be really interesting to preserve them, because I'm also assuming that a lot, especially of the folk music, really is an oral tradition, that it really was not written down, notated, and that there probably wasn't a notational standard that existed until, well, people like you came along.
The notation had been introduced to Afghanistan back in 1930s, 1940s, when Turkish musicians were brought to Afghanistan to teach in Afghan army. That's the beginning of the introduction of Western notation. And then there was that Turkish musician who was brought to Afghanistan by a very well-known Afghan intellectual, Mr. Tarzi Afandi. He was the one that was responsible for spreading Western notation. And then my father and subsequent musicians, they learned. And it was my father who adapted Western notation for preservation of Afghan folk music. And that's when he arranged over 170 songs from different ethnic parts of Afghanistan for this huge orchestra. That's the time, but they can. But the issue of preservation was also very important, especially nowadays when Afghanistan is music is banned in Afghanistan, and Afghan musicians are not allowed to practice on what they're good. It becomes our responsibility, the responsibility of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, that to not only in early days when I will return back to Afghanistan, my job and the mission of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music was to revive Afghan music and musical tradition, but at the same time to promote musical diversity in Afghanistan. Today, when we've been forced to flee Afghanistan, our mission is not only to fight for the restoration of the music rights of the Afghan people, but also to preserve Afghan musical tradition in exile. And when we that's why we're still teaching Afghan traditional instruments in Portugal. Still, the orchestras of the school, huge part of their repertoire is made of Afghan traditional and Afghan folk music. But of course, they are reworked, they are developed, and it's also in a way a good opportunity not only to preserve but also to develop Afghan music. And so, preservation of Afghan music and also ensuring that the making of Afghan instruments is living and continuity is important nowadays. And it's good that some of the people who are making Afghan instruments, they've been managing to leave Afghanistan, and now they're living in Iran and Pakistan, where they continue their craft. But also, to the best of my knowledge, there are people who are still continuing their craft of making instruments under Taliban underground.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. During the earlier periods of preserving the folk traditions, we know that, for example, in Europe and in North America, there were researchers who went to small villages in Appalachia and in small villages in England and across various parts of Europe. People like Cecil Sharp and Child and Alan Lomax and so on and Bela Bartok actually went out into little Hungarian villages with a cylinder recorder to make recordings to keep those. Was there that kind of field research going on in Afghanistan at all?
The beginning of field recording in Afghanistan goes back to early days of 20th century. 1907 is the first recording available by gramophone, who traveled from India to Afghanistan to Central Asia. I'm aware of about 15 songs recorded by gramophone. But then in late 60s, early 70s, an Afghan singer and musician, Mr. Madadi, he was also traveling to Afghanistan to collect folk music of Afghanistan and to preserve it. An Austrian musician who have been working in Afghanistan, he collected huge amounts of music from the province of Nuristan, and those music is now available. John Bailey, Lawrence Sakata, and Mark Zlobin, they are foreigners who also did a lot of field work and collected a lot of material in different parts of Afghanistan. But Madadi, a contemporary Afghan singer, he in 1960s and early 70s, he was traveling and collecting folk music. But later, after the defeat of the Taliban in 2001, Mr. Wahid Qasimi is a well-known singer. He's a grandson of Ustad Qasim, who stayed at Normal as the founder of contemporary Afghan music. He also traveled to north and northeastern part of Afghanistan, as well as to central part of the country and western part of Afghanistan, to collect music from the local musician as well as from the ordinary people. So that kind of job has been carried out, and the result is available.
I'm always astonished. Maybe it's because I come from the West and my country is a fairly young country, to know that there's this unbroken chain that is really just parents teaching their children or children hearing at festivals and special occasions, that literally goes back in an unbroken line for centuries and centuries and centuries, until someone comes along and actually writes it down or makes a record of it, which is, it's really just the very end tip of this long history to put them down in that permanent form, that it really is a living tradition. And I have to say that, for our listeners, if this seems like a slightly academic discussion, of course, we're talking about music, which is a living thing, a continuously evolving thing. Your discussion about how radio led to this continuous evolution proves it. So the best thing, of course, is for people to go out and discover and listen to the music itself. It's beautiful. It's powerful. It is festive. It's about life. It's about love. It's about, everything that you think music is about. And you can start by finding some of it on YouTube, as I've been discovering. So I would like to actually, just before we leave tradition per se, talk a little bit, because it certainly has played a very important role in ANIM's history, and that is the role of women in music, in Afghan culture and tradition, because you've helped to bring women back in and give them their musical voices again. And is that part of the long tradition?
Historical evidence shows the presence of female musicians at court for centuries and centuries. And there's well recorded data about the presence of women singers and dancers at the courts of Afghanistan. But when it comes to contemporary days of Afghanistan, in early days again, music was closely associated with dancing singers who were brought from Afghanistan, but unfortunately, whose role has been denied or not pointed out by the descendants. By their descendants, or the descendants of those musicians who were accompanying them, in order to these musicians selfishly, in order not to undermine their own social and artistic position in today's Afghanistan, they singly ignore the past of the connection of today's Afghan music, especially the Hindustani music, the introduction of Hindustani music to Afghanistan by this female musician. Normally, we're talking only of male musicians, but there were no names of those female dancing singers were known in the Afghan history. But with the introduction of radio to Afghanistan at the beginning, it was only a man show. Music was entirely represented by men. But slowly, first, some singers began to paving the way for themselves and for the others. So in contemporary, in 20th and 21st century, if we're going to talk about the music in radio Afghanistan and female musicians, we can just name a few names. But when it comes to the instrumental music or instrumental female musician, practically nothing happened until the establishment of the first music school in Afghanistan. There was some female students, but when I established the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, I was committed, and that was one of our major objectives, not only to revive Afghan music, not only to preserve, to promote musical diversity in Afghanistan, but also to make music world in Afghanistan gender equal. And that's why the 50% of the school new enrollees every year was this day for young Afghan girls to enroll to our program. I began in 2010 only by one girl, but by the arrival of Taliban to Afghanistan, more than one third of the student body were female musicians, but also female musicians were equally and beautifully presented in all ensembles of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, whether it was a traditional or whether it was a huge orchestra. But we also managed to establish a full women orchestra of Afghanistan made of 35 young musicians, conducted by two young and inspiring female conductors, also trained by our own school. So in this field, the presence of women was, though it historically, we're going to sum it, historically women were present in court music, and there's photograph that women dancers and also existed within the villages and village music, but at the same time, in Radio Afghanistan, there was not very small number of female singers that were paving the way for themselves and for others. Unfortunately, one of those brave ladies who was living in Canada until 2-3 days ago passed away in Canada, whose name is Azada. She was one of the first famous singers who paved the way for women of Afghanistan. In 2006, I went to Afghanistan for a fact-finding mission through the Monash University to see what was the impact of the years of civil war, migration of many musicians from Afghanistan as the result of the war, but also later due to the draconian policies of the Taliban and the total ban of the music. So I was very hopeful when I'm going back to Afghanistan because music was immediately back to the Afghan part of the Afghan cultural and social life. I was hoping that with the new regime and the millions of dollars that was pouring to Afghanistan, there is something to support the revival of Afghan music, to support music education in Afghanistan, to promote musical diversity in Afghanistan, to make music accessible to every Afghan child, to every Afghan youth, and also to make sure that music is properly used for the betterment of community and the power of music is used for the reunification of Afghanistan. I was extremely surprised when I arrived to Afghanistan to see the condition in which Afghan musicians were operating, to see the entire air of Afghanistan has been taken by music from neighboring countries, mainly from India, Turkey, and Central Asia. But the voice of Afghan musician was not heard in this big push of music back to Afghanistan. But if music was played by Afghan, it was mainly music created by a synthesizer or by a computer outside Afghanistan in Los Angeles or in Bay Area or somewhere else, and that was the type of music. But the diversity of Afghan music was entirely neglected. Support for Afghan musicians did not exist. A music education program which could bring happiness to the Afghan people and also train professional musicians for Afghanistan, and also a program that could assist with the revival of Afghan music and preservation of Afghan music did not exist. And musicians were, one day it was the beginning of winter, musicians were coming to the music production of Radio Afghanistan in a very tough condition. They did not have musical instruments. The rooms were cold with no heating system and no condition for their practices. And absolutely, it was a big mess. And that's why when I came back outside of Afghanistan, I prepared that report, the Revival of Afghan Music Project, with 9 recommendations, what has to be done in order to rebuild the music sector in Afghanistan. And that project was inclusive of rebuilding music education on primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. That was also the rebuilding of musician quarter. Karabat was part of this project. Preservation of Afghan musical corpus was part of this project. Rebuilding music industry in Afghanistan was part of this project, but also ensuring the music rights of the Afghan people, but also to protect the creativity of Afghan musicians and give back a voice to the Afghan musicians so their creativity is used for the betterment of Afghan music. So for 2 years, I tried to still be in my comfort zone in Australia, enjoying my life here with my family, but trying to do something for Afghanistan from Australia, and in convincing the donor community to invest in arts and culture and music in Afghanistan. 2 years clearly showed me that come out of your dreams. It's very naive. If you want to really do something for Afghanistan, you have to be on the ground. You have to be there. You have to live with the people. You have to live with the donor community. And you have to show that what you're proposing, it is something that Afghanistan would be benefiting from that. And then when I went back to Afghanistan, it was hard. So Afghan government in that time in 2006, 2008, there's still an Afghan parliament. There were elements who were advocating for ban of music again in the country, who were advocating for the ban of Afghan women voices in radio and television of Afghanistan. So I went there within such a condition. My first task was to convince the Afghan government that you can build a just civil society, a democratic society, if you're not giving or not respecting the cultural rights of the Afghan people. I was arguing that democracy or civil society is not just Afghan parliament and a number of political parties, which were mainly created based on ethnicity. Those political parties even were not totally or truly represented the Afghan people. So I was arguing that with the Afghan governments that in order to revive Afghan music, preserve Afghan music, it should become part of the official policies of the Afghan government, and support has to be offered for the creation of entities and institutions which would help Afghanistan to save its musical tradition, but at the same time embrace musical and cultural diversity and promote it in Afghanistan as basic human rights of the Afghan people. So it took me some good 2 years to convince Afghan politicians and get a political support for the establishment of a dedicated music school, because the project that I originally designed and introduced, it was huge. It was requiring multi-million dollars. And the Afghan government was not ready to do this, and they did not have the resources. Then the other difficulty was the donor community. For the donor community, there was other priorities in Afghanistan rather than arts and culture and music. The top priority was to investing in Afghan police, in Afghan intelligence services, in Afghan the National Army. But again, in my meeting with many ambassadors and members of the donor community, I was arguing that all this that you're saying is important, but you cannot defeat the ideology of the Taliban. You cannot push the country to a true democratic society if you're not investing in arts and culture. Arts and culture and music can play a significant role in establishment of that society. I never forget my meeting with an Australian ambassador in Afghanistan. I spoke to him for 45 minutes to talk to him and to make sure that he understands that music can help international peacekeeping force in Afghanistan to obtain their goals uh, in the country. But after speaking to him for 40 minutes and 45 minutes, he said that Dr. Sarmast, you convinced me, but it's hard for me to convince my country, for my government, for which music is a luxury for Afghanistan. So I began working in such a difficult time, getting political support, but also convincing the international community to invest in music. Music can help Afghanistan in many ways. I was also arguing about the healing power of music. Afghanistan was in war for 40 years and that time 30 years. And every family in Afghanistan, in one or another way, they were affected by years of civil war, Afghanistan invasion, and so on. So I was arguing that Afghanistan needs more than anything else to benefit from the healing power of music, from the ability of music to contribute to the reunification of Afghanistan, because in the years of civil war, Afghanistan was badly divided based on ethnicity. Every political party, many political parties who've been fighting each other, they were promoting a particular ethnic group interest, or they were trying to obtain their personal benefit using them by playing the ethnic cards in Afghanistan. So I had a huge argument to do in order to convince everyone that this is important for Afghanistan. This is to be funded.
Well, it's how shall I say it? It's very hard to persuade a general that love builds stronger walls than weapons. But ultimately, I firmly believe that that's the case. And if I can just add, the conditions that you described, with so much music coming from outside after the Taliban left, in some ways that must have been more dangerous for the survival of your culture than when the Taliban was there. Because when the Taliban was there, people would keep the music alive in their hearts and their minds and memories as an act of resistance. But once you have so much music coming from outside, very attractive, seductive, commercial, pop, and so on music, that can basically erase people's memory.
That's exactly when I was in Afghanistan. I met with the Minister of Culture one day to encourage him to come up with a music production policy. My idea was not to censor music in Afghanistan. I was trying to encourage the Minister of Culture of Afghanistan to give the voice of Afghan musicians back to them, to enable Afghan music to actively create and contribute to the revival of their musical tradition, preservation of their tradition, but at the same time promoting musical diversity. I proposed to him that I said that Afghanistan is musically very rich, but in Afghan media, you cannot see the classical tradition of Afghanistan. There was no music presented by the classical or arts musician of the country. Afghan folk music of different ethnic group of Afghanistan was totally absent on the Afghan media. And the only type of music, again, it was created outside by a synthesizer that was supported in Afghanistan. When I proposed the design and introduction of music broadcast policy, but it was clearly not to censor, but it was aim was to enable Afghan musicians to create a musical balance between different type of music that is presented in Afghanistan, but also to ensure that Afghan musicians have access to a variety of music, and Afghan or non-music Afghan, Western classical or jazz or rap or pop music, all this should be available, but not on the expense of the Afghan musical identity.
Let's talk a little bit about the conditions that led up to the creation of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. You've described the conditions that existed in your country in the 1990s as a cultural genocide, and you've talked about things like destroying the Afghan National Museum, of course, the destruction of the Bamyan Buddhas, and I understand that the Taliban destroyed all the music stores as well. It must have been an enormously daunting concept when you came back in 2006, just a few years after the Taliban was driven out, to imagine how to turn the tide for your nation. I know that you had a project called Rome, the revival of Afghan music, but can you just give a story? I mean, it must have felt like standing at the bottom of a huge mountain that you had to climb. How did you come to the decision that this would fall upon your shoulders to take this on, just to make a space?
The response of the minister was to me, the Dr. Sarmast, if there's something that we achieve, it is freedom of expression. And what you're proposing is a censor. I tried to convince it's not a censor. It cements the freedom of expression in Afghanistan and ensures freedom of expression. That's it. That freedom of expression also should give a voice to the Afghan musician also, but not just Hindustani music, Indian music, Bollywood music, Turkish music, Tajik music, Iranian music, but not Afghan music.
I can imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong about this, but at a time when there had been heightened tensions and hostilities between different ethnic groups, to play the traditional music of one ethnic group might be seen as taking sides by the other ethnic groups. So that must have been also a little bit of a sensitive aspect too.
That's when we began to creating our ensemble and orchestras, and when we've been creating and commissioning new songs to be created in the languages that we've been selected. We always I was very, very cautious about this issue, especially that I called my music school the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. I really wanted this school to be a national entity, an entity that presents diverse ethnic mosaic of Afghanistan, diverse musical tradition of Afghanistan, diverse languages of Afghanistan, but at the same time promotes musical diversity in the country. And that's why even today, when we are playing outside Afghanistan, we are not in Afghanistan any longer. But when we're programming the repertoire of the Afghan Youth Orchestra or the Afghan Traditional Orchestra, when there's number of Afghan songs selected, we make sure that we have got diversity of music, especially the two major music that has been presented and the two major languages that is the subject of continuous conflict in Afghanistan. So we try to make sure that that balance is kept, and ANIM is not. There's no criticism that should gonna come to our others that we are promoting a particular ethnic group or a particular musical culture or a particular musical tradition.
Very, very challenging balance to strike. But I have to say that if there was ever a symbol of your commitment to musical diversity, even though this didn't come from you, was when you won the prestigious Swedish Polar Music Prize in 2018. And it's always given to two artists, and the other artist was Metallica. So you and Metallica.
I think that the one musically we have two different work, but by the end of the day, Metallica and ANIM shares some common values, which is the use of music for the betterment of community and betterment of our people. That was very common in that ground, and I respect Metallica for their commitment to social causes. But again, we had a number of rock ensemble in our own school, like White Page and the Voice of Peace. They're rock ensemble that come out of our school and with our students. But again, musically and socially, especially socially, Metallica and it has many things in common.
That's fantastic. And speaking about social causes, I understand that there was a little bit of a difference of opinion in the very beginning of the Institute because the government wanted to focus on the most gifted students, the ones who would likely become professional musicians, and you wanted to make sure that there was space for the most disadvantaged students, people who were orphans or were selling things on the street, and also, of course, for girls. How did you resolve that? And also, it speaks to, and I want to get into this a little bit more, the idea that music is more than just entertainment. It's more than just diversion. It has a really central role in humanity, in building a better and more just world, in creating a more perfect human family and civilization. But talk about how those discussions were resolved, and the where the idea came that you should create this, as a space for opportunities for kids who really had so little else in their lives, so few opportunities.
The idea is that I noted in early at the beginning of our conversation when I was speaking to my father and his life, that was his life story. How music changed his life from an orphanage to become a superstar of Afghan music. That's where from the idea came, and that's where this beliefs in the power of music came to me. And that's why that the reason I was also planning to have our students from orphanages. It was the fact that Taliban were in power long enough to bring up or to make sure that a generation of Afghan people are brought up with the same mentality, which music has no place. And that's why it was my idea was that it will be extremely tough to convince people to send their kids to music education. I thought, okay, let's repeat the same experience that Afghanistan successfully had in 1930s. Go to the orphanages, get students from there, help them to have a better life, but also fulfill the music school. That was the idea, and but mainly it was the power of music for betterment of those kids. But after the Minister of Education agreed to adapt my proposal to one of the development projects, I had a meeting with the Minister of Education. The minister, I don't want to comment on his political values, but culturally, he was very much committed or very much open to the idea of establishing music school as a means for promoting Afghanistan towards a democratic society. But when we had a discussion, he said to me, I remember that discussion. It was also there was representative of the World Bank present because World Bank agreed to support us, and that was during one of those meetings. He said, Dr. Sarmast, the idea is very noble. It's good that you're gonna change the life of those disadvantaged group of Afghan kids through music. But what's going to happen with the other types of Afghanistan who are not living in an orphanage or who are not working on the streets of Kabul? But again, they might be belonging to the Afghan people who are also very poor. Because in Afghanistan, we did not have middle class, and still we do not have a middle class. And there was very rich and very poor. Even people who have been employed by the Afghan government and had a source of income, but that was not sufficient to push this families towards to becoming a middle class. So, and when the minister argued that we should not block the school or access to the school to other talents, then I agree to, okay, 50% of the school should be annually reserved for disadvantaged kids. The other 50% will be open to all other Afghan kids, regardless of their gender, ethnicity, social circumstances, economic background, or political background of their families. But those vacancies should be also filled in through a test of musical aptitude. Because I was thinking that while I strongly believe that music should be accessible to every child, but at the same time knowing that this is the only music school in the country, you really want to see the outcome and the positive changes that music school can bring up. So and therefore we have been enrolling our students after the test of musical aptitude, which was practically some musical games. But you as a musician, you know that some musical games, just that clapping, enable you to see how good the sense of rhythm is in a child. There were people that could not count up to four, but there were people that who could clap the most complicated rhythmic patterns.
Right. So the standard tests don't tell all, one, and two, you know, as I think about it, in some ways that mixture may actually have been an advantage because it also brings together children from different backgrounds and classes who might not have had a chance to see each other as, classmates and colleagues and friends without that blending. The other thing, of course, is that I can imagine that one of the areas of thought behind focusing on excellence primarily and aptitude is to think about economic terms. We're going to build a music industry and economic development to help rebuild the economy. But I have this sort of bigger view of economy, which is instead of what some people in the economics world call trickle down, is that the wealth trickles up to the higher strata of society when it really is embraced by the people as a whole. Anyway, you obviously achieved enormous results because the school started in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, and you began giving performances outside of Afghanistan in a really incredibly short period of time after that. Talk about those first visits outside of the country.
The very first visit outside of the country, it was the show of Faculty of Afghan Traditional Instruments. We participated in a music festival in Uzbekistan. That was the very, very first one. But the very, very huge tour outside Afghanistan, it was in 2013 when we traveled with the Afghan Youth Orchestra to the United States. And in that time, the orchestra was conducted by its the founding conductor, William Harvey, who was an American citizen employed to teach in Afghanistan violin and viola. So this talented musician managed to put the orchestra together, and the students have been worked also very hard. And the beginning, that tour was not just to go and play such a big tour. It was just to go with a small number of students to perform a performance at the World Bank to show the World Bank support, the changes that the World Bank support in the field of music education can bring anywhere in the world, as it's had that great impact in Afghanistan. But then we developed this project in something much, much bigger. And we wanted to show that when we are going to the United States, let's show to the United States and to the United States people that that's okay. You helped Afghanistan to get back their freedom from the tyranny of the Taliban and the terrorists. And that's also your support means that the Afghan kids are now once again able to obtain their a music education. And now they are here to playing the role, some of the instruments that are very familiar to you, but also some instruments that you might not be familiar or meet on those. And also the type of music that you probably never had an opportunity to listen to, it will be shared there. So that was the very first tour in 2013. But as we've been moving, and one of the reasons that tour was possible because in 2013 when we established that we have been traveling, in 2010 when I established the school, we enrolled some music students of the School of Fine Arts, and the best of which I established the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. they already had some basic music education and some basic skill. But the 3 years that when they've been working under the professional guidance of expert faculty that's been brought from a real music educator to music educator and professionals, and the curriculum and the condition helps those kids to grow up very fast and polish their skills and to move and to be able to play some Western pieces such as the Fourth Season of Vivaldi during the tour has been performed, and we call it Fourth Season of Afghanistan.
To achieve that in a period of 3 years, even if some of the students had some basic skills, is A, phenomenal, but also thinking about what those children had lived through, or even their parents if they were very young. This must have been like an incredible new world being open to them, to be traveling outside the country, to see, big cities and in other countries, to stand up in front of audiences that were applauding for them and, giving love back to them. What a huge gift, because not only for them and their experience, but their families back home and other young Afghans who could see that these kinds of achievements would be possible for them too. The role modeling effect must have been incredible.
I remember back in 2010 when the school was established, it was the Taliban were just a few years back removed, but the people with the same mentality still were within the Afghan community, and we had to change their attitude and re-educate them. In 2010, there was a lot of negativity in the social media against the establishment of the school. But the 2013 tour and subsequent tours, huge tours to other European countries with smaller ensemble that was very well broadcasted and covered by the media, brought back pride to Afghanistan. The Afghan people were extremely proud to see their kids playing in such an important venues as Carnegie, but also to show a better side of Afghanistan, to introduce Afghan music, to present Afghan music to wider communities. This and ANIM ensemble and orchestras began to serve as the pride of Afghan people. I remember when we were in 2013 in the United States, the comments in the social media was 90% positive. Well, I remember 2017 when we traveled to the World Economic Forum with the All Women Orchestra of Afghanistan, Zora. I remember that the reception of the people, but that was probably that's also it's a good thing to remember here. When we returned back to Afghanistan, that's something that's never happened in the history of music in Afghanistan. My girls, my member of the Zora Orchestra, were met in Kabul airport by a huge crowd of Afghan people by flowers. They organized themselves. They come to the airport. They've been waiting for our students, the member of the Zora Orchestra, to return, and they will receive a bunch of flowers on their arrivals. So that is the same country where music was banned by the Taliban. But did you see the appreciation?
Well, not only that, but because that was, and by the way, folks, Zora is, in fact, the all women's orchestra. They have a woman conductor, if I'm not mistaken. For to go from a period in which the role of women was so restricted and damaged and confined and harmed, to this group of courageous young women, talented and courageous young women, being heroes of the nation, literally heroes of the nation. What a transformation. And I dare say that, you could lecture people who had come from a conservative backgrounds for months about women's rights and women's equality and not do as much as their return to Kabul after that tour achieved.
That's true. The tour changed in the tour changed in many ways the attitude of the Afghan community and the Afghan people towards the ability of women. That women can make Afghanistan as proud as the men, and women can contribute to any aspects of life, including to music. Because until the establishment of ANIM and Zora, we did not add female instrumentalists in Afghanistan. and also female conductor. The only two conductors Afghanistan had in the past, it was my father and another music teacher of our school, peace be upon him, who started Nangiala. But in 2017, 2015 to 27, then Afghanistan has had a female orchestra and a female conductor. So that was also showed the positive changes that how far Afghanistan moved after the defeat of the Taliban. In terms of ensuring the women rights in Afghanistan. But Zora Orchestra became a symbol of emancipation and empowerment of women in Afghanistan. And that's why it was so highly respected within the progressive forces of Afghanistan as well as by the Afghan women. And recently, when we toured the United States, where we played at the Kennedy Center and Carnegie Hall, now when I can see when I watch the videos of this events, the venues have been practically exploding by the well reception that the Afghan musicians received, and every piece was accompanied by yelling and by screaming and by clapping and by singing. The videos of the Kennedy Center that I saw, that the entire hall is singing together with our musicians. And after the tour, I received so many new positive messages from the ordinary Afghans that ANIM is really giving them a hope. That the Afghan music is alive, but also we should be hopeful for tomorrow's Afghanistan, watching your performances, watching your musicians, watching these young kids and their commitment to their musical tradition and also to Afghanistan.
So let me correct myself. Not just heroes of the nation, but heroes of all nations. And just to, at the risk of repeating myself, music is more than music. Its effects are truly, truly world-changing. For people who doubt it, just listen to the story, see it with your own eyes. However, our story does take a dark turn, because although the Taliban was officially gone, they weren't completely gone, and you experienced that in a very, very violent and tragic way in 2014, only a year after that first performance outside of the country, when you had a suicide bomber at one of your performances. Can you tell us that story? I know it's painful and a traumatic story to tell, but I think it's important for people to understand the obstacles that you had to face, and that they didn't just go away magically overnight, that they were still there.
I remember, that in 2010, when the school had been established, the Minister of Education, where my office was based, at the Deputy Ministry for Technical and Vocational Education, there were people with Taliban like ideology and mentality. I remember that in the very first weeks when the school was established, a guy who was previously associated with the Taliban, but after the defeat of the Taliban, he decided to join the Afghan government and to stay in Kabul. And he was appointed as a religious advisor to the Deputy Ministry for Technical and Vocational Education. He jokingly, but I strongly believe that he was delivering to me a true message. He said that, Dr. Sarmast, our brothers on the other side of the battlefield are not happy with the establishment of the school. And I said, okay, tell to your little brothers, to your brothers, if they're not happy, if they want to planning to do something and it makes them happy, I'm going to open the school for themselves, and they can come and slaughter this group of young people to get some noises. Then in 2 days, he came to me and said, no, Dr. Summers, they don't have anything against the kids, but against you and your faculty. So I began this one to become a bit serious and began to threatening him. But again, I thought probably it's a joke. Then in 2014 or 2013, after the school made a lot of noises, not just because of the United States tour, but there was many other tours. But I also received in that year the honorary membership of the Royal Philharmonic Society of UK. Then a journalist from BBC, a local journalist, a local man, told me, I met him in the Indian embassy, showed me the website of the Taliban in which my photo was posted with a note, eligible to be killed. Again, I did not take it serious. I said, okay, it's just a tape, but that's okay. And then in 2014, December 2014, we had a concert. It was a joint performance with a local theater in Afghanistan. It was a musical drama about the suicide bombing and the impact of the suicide bombing on the Afghan community, the pain and the misery that this bombing brings to Afghan people. So during these performances, I was sitting there. We did not expect, but in that time there was a lot of bombing in Afghanistan. A lot of suicide bombing in 2014 was happening in the country. But in that evening, this show, which was about suicide bombing, about the misery that it causes, it turns to be a live show. Yeah, it was live broadcast on the by number of Afghan TV stations when the suicide bomber exploded himself within the audience. He was sitting right behind my back. And then later the Taliban acknowledged that I was one of the targets in this event. But sometimes the happenings are sometimes that something saved you. I believe that I haven't done anything wrong. And the people were telling me that it was the prayers of those families whose kids have been rescued and saved and been given a better opportunity through the schools that you've been saved. But in that time, there was some noises outside. I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to my mobile phone to see what's happening. And normally my driver outside was saying he was letting me know what's happening. So I tried to get in touch with him, but I dropped the phone between the seats. And when I was inclining to pick up my phone, that's the moment that the suicide bomber exploded himself. So I was pushed by the wave of the bombing and also by the sharpness out of my chest to 3 meters forward. I can't remember what's happened, but when I was getting back my conscience, I remember that I was telling to myself, "Oh, you had a nightmare. There's nothing happened. It was just a nightmare." And I was touching my head to see if anything. And then when I touched my head, I see that it's heavily bleeding. And then I noticed that something happened. But still, I was not sure what's happened. So I was not hearing anything. But I saw the smoke. I could smell, I could smell the like barbecue, like kebab, the smell of a kebab because the guy was burning, saved the suicide bomber. Some other people were killed there, but I was not guessing what's happening. So I made my way. I tried to make my way back to the lobby, and then I saw. I thought that I cannot move my leg. My leg. Then when I looked at it, I saw that my leg was stuck in the coat of a lady who was unconscious. I'm not sure whether she was dead or unconscious, but then I freed my leg and moved forward. Still, I was not figuring out what's happening. But when I came outside, I saw the director of the French Institute of Afghanistan, where our concert was held. I tried to ask, but she talked to me. I could not hear her. I thought it's noisy, but I could not hear it. But eventually, she typed on a mobile phone that there was a bombing. I saw. Then, when I read that there was a bombing, I remember that my students were on the stage. So I rushed back to the venue, but then the security people arrived and they were trying to stop me. And I said, it's impossible. So I made my way back. Then I saw that there was a lot of flood on the stage on the venue. And when I moved to the stage, where the students were playing, there was no blood on the stage, but I saw that the musical instruments were thrown all over the stage, that the people threw the musical instruments and ran for their life. And when I made my way backstage, I saw that there was a big crowd of people, including my musician, trying to use the back doors, backstage and back door to get out of the venue. I saw one of my students who was a bit taller than others. I asked him that everyone is okay, but he answered that well, I was not able to hear to him. And I asked again, I repeated again, but I was not able to hear to him. But we left the venue together. But when I went and left outside the venue, I saw that there was no any students. I did not know anyone. But when I went come out, I was heavily bleeding. And I remember a man came to me and he hugged me and said, "Dr. Sarmast, you're bleeding." And he took his scarf, neck scarf, put it around my hair and took me to my car. And then my driver drove out in the emergency hospital.
Other than the bomber, were any people killed?
2 people, one German guy and one Afghan journalist. That was what was reported officially.
Horrible, horrible. So you lost your hearing.
I lost my hearing. I was not able to hear anything for many days, and then slowly I began getting some of my hearing ability, but still it was not uh, sure. It was continuously after my hearing began to coming, I had the feeling that I've got a huge symphony orchestra in my head, and everyone plays out of tune.
Ouch.
Out of tune, everyone was playing for themselves, whatever they wanted, but it was a big mess there. So. But
Right.
then I was receiving medical assistance in Kabul until I was allowed to fly out because I had 11 shrapnels on my head, and some of them were very, very close to the brain. My doctors were the doctors were not allowing me to travel because they were fearful that the air pressure might be pushing them in the airplane inside, and that's why they kept me for some time in Kabul. And then when I after 3 weeks, they sent the X-rays and everything outside Afghanistan, and then I was allowed to fly out, and I got back to Australia. But Monash University, where I was associated with in the past, helped me a lot. They set up everything ready when I arrived. I was immediately taken to the trauma center, and where I had the operation for removal of the shrapnels and fixing my ear.
And eventually you were able to return. Now, how is your hearing now?
One is 95%, 90% back, and the other one is about 70.
So you can enjoy music again.
Yeah, I enjoy music back, but the only problem I've got now, if there's so many people in a room and everyone speaks, then I'm not able to distinguish who's speaking what.
Right. But you didn't have to go through the rest of your life like Beethoven.
No, no, I'm much better.
That's good. But obviously a horrible, horrifying incident.
That was not the only incident that Taliban targeted our school, but after this bombing, they issued a press release that normally they do not name who was the target or anything. But in that case, they give my name in their press release, and they promised to continue their efforts to silence the music school and any music institution who promotes music, which they called it infidelity. So, but in 2015, another plot against our school has been discovered, first of which I learned from the Australian embassy, and then Afghan intelligence officers arrested and blocked away 4 people with the suicide vest who've been planning to target our school. In 2017, another network has been arrested in Kabul. One of them whose task was to eliminate myself, to establish my routine in order to carry out a terrorist attack. And then in 2020, October 2020, we received another warning from the National Security Advisor Office of the President of Afghanistan that our school is high in the hit list of the Taliban.
That also proves to me not only a sign of your own courage, but of your students, because they kept coming back to school, correct?
It's not just the student, but also the families. In 2014, when the bombing happened, we dismissed the school for a month or so the student can get away from the trauma, the student community, the teachers, everyone should forget about this event, but also to beef up security around the school to make the school a safer place when we resume our activity, especially when the Taliban promised that they're going to continue to attack us. So, but when we resumed our activities back in 2015, beginning of 2015, I was in Australia receiving my treatment. I get back in touch with Kabul. My fear on the day when the students were supposed to come out, my fear was that probably the family is not going to let their kids come back to the school, or a small number going to come back. But when I called to Kabul to my colleague who has been replacing me and was assigned to take a look after the school, when I asked how is things are like and how many people come, she said, Dr. Sarmast, you can't believe all students have been accompanied by their parents today to the school, and we have every single child back to the school.
That's unbelievable. You're going to make me cry, sir. It's such a beautiful story, and out of such tragedy, and it's really fascinating. If music is a force worth living for, to have such a dedication that it's worth risking potentially dying for. that is a true commitment to the enormous embrace of affirmation of life and love, that we pour all of the best of ourselves into our musical expression. And through that, we amplified the best of ourselves. It really also makes me think about what a sense of collective loss we all feel when the world's cultural treasures are defaced and damaged. There was a famous novel called Fahrenheit 451. I don't know if you're familiar with it, by Ray Bradbury, about a future time in which books are banned. And the force of a few people who resist that tyranny by memorizing books and then leaving society to form a community where they become living books. It really reminds me of your case. If I can share a story that in a way has a resonance to this. We all remember the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The next morning, and it was, of course, deeply shocking. Anyone who's visited that incredible building and seen the architecture, but also the spiritual force, no matter what tradition you come from, that was the inspiration behind building it at a time when people didn't have machines or technology, and they literally spent their entire lives dedicated to the cause of celebrating the Almighty, the Creator. The next morning, I took a taxi, and I was talking with the driver, and I said to him, "Did you see the story about Notre Dame?" And he said to me, "That church? Yes. I come from Ethiopia, and I have never heard of that church before, and it's not part of my religious tradition. But when I saw that fire, I felt as though the world had taken something away from me and from my life."
That's what's happening once again today in Afghanistan. It's not just a fire, that is not an accident, but again, it's a systematic move against the cultural heritage of Afghanistan, once again by the Taliban. You, at the beginning of our conversation, spoke about the destruction of Buddhas of Bamiyan, about the destruction of artifacts in the Afghanistan National Museum. But also in that time, they banned the celebration of thousands of years New Year celebration, Nowruz, which is celebrated in Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia, in many countries. But today, when I'm speaking to you, once again, Taliban reinstated the law of 1996. About 10 days ago, Taliban, for the first time, introduced a new law for the promotion of virtue and prevention of vice. That is the new document that officializes and legalizes the ban of music in Afghanistan, total ban of music in Afghanistan. But also, this new document is practically depriving Afghan women from their voice. Even now, Afghan women, in spite of all, instead of all difficulties that have been imposed on them and all this restriction, now they have to fully cover themselves within the community. But also, when they're in community, they should not speak, and no man should be able to listen to their voices. Just 2 days ago, Taliban reported of destruction of 21,000 pieces of musical instruments proudly. With a proud, they were so proud to destroy 21,000 pieces of musical instruments. When you mentioned at the beginning of the cultural genocide, and I strongly believe that this new draconian law, once again, pushes Afghanistan towards another cultural genocide by the Taliban. Now, destruction of 21 pieces of musical instruments is not just musical instruments, including among those instruments where instruments that's the symbol of Afghan national musical identity. Tens of rubab or hundreds of rubab have been destroyed and burned by the Taliban. But it's also a direct attack on the musical and cultural heritage of Afghanistan. If the Taliban are not stopped and if the conditions are not created back in Afghanistan, I think that every Afghan musician probably going to become a living music academia for the future, as you can said about the living libraries. But today, that's what's happening in Afghanistan. So the new decree that the Taliban had just come up 2 days ago if a poet decides to come up with a new poem, they should get permission from the Taliban to recite or to compose a poem. So they're moving much, much far once again than just a cultural genocide. This new law, I believe that the entire international community should condemn it and make sure that it's removed practically. It is a calculated dehumanization and humiliation of Afghan people and Afghan culture and Afghan tradition.
Is horrifying and shocking. 21,000 musical instruments. It's almost inconceivable. It reminds me of something that was said by another one of my musical heroes, Dr. Jose Antonio Abreu, the founder of El Sistema, who we gave our Glenn Gould Prize to in 2009. And he gave a talk at the events that we held in his honor. And he said, I come from a country where there's a lot of poverty, children who grow up without much hope, without much opportunity. But I'll tell you this, when you place a musical instrument into the hand of a child, a beautiful object created by a craftsman with love and care, that child is no longer poor. That child has a world of the spirit open to them that changes their entire concept of what their lives can be. And to take away 21,000 of those rays of hope from children and from adults and from masters and from villages and communities and traditions is inconceivable to me. It's horrifying. What kind of image, I mean, you've lived in a society where these people were. I don't know whether you've actually been able to converse with them since they hate you, but what kind of image of Allah can they have? Nothing that I know from what I've read about Islam, from the poetry and the art and the architecture and the medicine and the discoveries and the society that existed, welcoming all people of the book. It's inconceivable that they can call themselves Muslims.
Unfortunately, they call themselves the pure Muslim, the true Muslim, and they do not recognize any other countries around the world as a true Muslim country, and they call them these Muslim countries are run by corrupt leaders. But in the Islam that the Taliban are promoting, it's a Islam that has been created by themselves. It has nothing to do with the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran, the very first way said that Ikra, read, which is supporting men and women to study and to go to school and to learn. But the Taliban are today ban women from education from grade 6 upward. So, and the schools that they are now having, they're also moving towards or against the secular education. And now they're converting every university and every school in a madrasa. And they are in the last 3 years, they are involved in the so-called revolving the curriculum of universities and the School of Afghanistan, which is practically a madrasa where they will be promoting suicide bombing and terrorism. And today, once again, Afghanistan is a safe haven for the terrorists from around the world. Al Qaeda is a close partner of the Taliban. Haqqani, the notorious the terrorist, whose advisor is a high-ranking associate of the Al Qaeda. The Al Qaeda leader has been killed in Kabul Green Zone and next to the Haqqani home. Now you can see that now more and more data is coming that soon we will be witnessing another element of September that will be once again originated from Afghanistan or carried out by a terrorist group that has a safe haven in my country.
It's truly devastating to hear you say that, and to know that if I know anything at all about the world of religion and religions, all religions, they have one thing in common, which is an understanding about the need for compassion, for love as the heart of all sacred traditions, that to turn the concept of faith into one of hatred and violence is the opposite of what religious faith is about. And to then make music something as pure and and positive in the life of the world into a sin and a crime is beyond human understanding. Well, I don't want to make a speech about it because I think we feel the same way. But let's bring our story to the present because, of course, when they came back, you had to leave. It must have been very dangerous at the moment when the previous government collapsed and they were coming into Kabul and across the country. How did you make your escape and talk about the new life? I don't want to use the word in exile, but let's say as guests in another country.
I was living in exile for many years before returning back to Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan during the first reign of the Taliban, and I arrived to Australia where I began to build my life, and we maybe together with my life we built a middle class life here in Australia. But when in June, July, when there is normally the season of fighting, which is fighting in intensifying in Afghanistan. As usually, we were involved with our summer camp, and after the summer camp, we released 2 new videos and we recorded our annual gala concert. And after that, the school went for their summer holidays, and I decided to go back to Australia to receive some medical assistance and a checkup. I was here when they thought the provinces began collapsing. At the beginning, I was very optimistic, and I was saying, okay, today this province collapsed, but tomorrow the government gonna get it back. It's happened in the last 20 years many times. So it's work. One day the anime gets it, but the next day the government gonna get it back. But during that time, we also released 2 new songs, and then I came for my treatment, and the provinces happened. I was still optimistic, but as the Taliban began getting closer to Kabul, I began panicking for the safety and security of my faculty. I began panicking for the safety and security of many young musicians who've been in forefront of promoting music in Afghanistan, promoting democratic values through ANIM concert, ANIM videos, ANIM promotions, and also about the dream of those kids. They had a huge dream to become professional musicians. They had a huge dream to help their country. So I became very worried, and then I called a meeting of the Friends of Anim, which is a non-for-profit organization established in 2014 in the United States, to see how we can help and how we can get our students to safety and security, and to give them another chance to dream and to get at least an education. For me, it was always clear when the Taliban gonna come back, they will be the same Taliban of 1996. There was a lot of speculation in the Western media who were preparing the ground for the return of the Taliban. The Taliban of 2001 are better than the Taliban of 1996. But for me, working in Afghanistan, witnessing their attack on a music school, it was clear that the days of music school will be finished. So we have to find a solution. Then we began forming a huge network of friends, which was inclusive of politicians, musicians, human rights advocates, lawyers, people of goodwill, philanthropists, and so on. And we began trying to chasing and sending appeals to the head of state. So eventually, then I sent appeals to the United States, Germany, UK, Switzerland, um, Portugal, but the only country who positively responded to us, it was Portugal. And Portugal offered a group assignment to our students and to faculty. But again, we tried to get everyone before the Taliban are coming fully in charge of Afghanistan, which was supposed to happen before the 31st of August, when the international peacekeeping force were supposed to entirely disappear Afghanistan, and the Kabul airport will come under the control of the Taliban. So on the 27th, we have been instructed by the CILCOM of the United States that's okay, we are happy to get you out of Afghanistan today to some of the neighboring countries, and then you have to go to Portugal yourself by whatever means you would be able to do it. After being 17 hours ping-ponged between the gates of the Kabul airport from north to the south, from south to the north, from north to the central, eventually we've been instructed it's not going to happen. there's a huge risk and there's a huge danger that there will be another bombing at the Kabul airport. It's better, it's safe that you're going to sit back.
Yeah.
So we sat back. It did not happen. And the community, the students, the faculty, they were practically heartbroken after the Kabul airport was closed. And they're stuck in Afghanistan. But I said this, we will be working. I get back in touch with the government of Portugal, who they assured us about their offer. Then, together with the friends of ANIM, we tried to find a solution, a country who would be able to get us out of Afghanistan. Eventually, we've been connected to the government of Qatar, who played a huge role in evacuating and also navigating our needs and also ensuring that our students are allowed to travel, whether they are minor or major students, and the faculty should be allowed to travel. And then in 2021, on the early October, the evacuation began. First, over 100 people have been evacuated. Then the rest of the people did not have passport. We had to find a solution. We had many meetings with many foreign ministers to begging them for giving us passports of their own countries. So in order to enable our students to leave Afghanistan, because passport was the only acceptable document to the Taliban. After it did not work, and it was obvious that no one gonna issue passport to us, and the travel document was not acceptable to the Taliban. I moved to Qatar to work closely on the ground with the Qatar authorities to see if they can help. But eventually, the Qatar said, yes, we can help you with their passports. And then the Qataris facilitated obtaining of 180 passports for the rest of our community to leave Afghanistan. So we begin on the 3rd of August, and on the 13th of December, exactly right after 4 months, the evacuation of 273 people to Portugal has been completed. And we were trying to begin our build back. But again, it was not the end of our story and the end of the difficulties as we left Afghanistan. Portugal was very generous in terms of receiving us, but of course we had to deal with their legal system as well. There, we had 73 young kids in our group, unaccompanied young kids traveling without their families, without their parents. So their guardianship would become a huge issue in Portugal for us, and where we had to deal with the social security and with the children and family court. That a name or keeping the kids is the best solution for the best interest of students, rather than splitting them into a group of one and two and giving them into foster care all over Portugal. So after some 8 months of court battle with the children and family court, the aim of the court was to the best interest of a child. Our interest was also the best interest of our kids, and also to make sure that the kids are able to continue what they've been doing in Afghanistan, and also to stay together, and also to reform and rebuild and to preserve the future music of Afghanistan. So eventually, a decision has been made that we all should move to the north of Portugal, to the city of Braga, where the kids can be living in small groups in residential caves, but not all together. But again, they'll be very close to each other. They will be enrolled in one music school, and there will be is already opportunities in place for you to rebuild and to revive your program. So eventually, we managed to get there, and after some 8 months or 9 months of difficulties living in a temporary accommodation, which was a old military hospital, eventually we moved to begin our new life. And today, when I'm talking to you, I'm very pleased that the kids, their integration goes very well. Their schooling is going very well. Some of them are extremely successful in their program and in the conservatory. We rebuilt the Afghan Youth Orchestra, the Zor Orchestra, the Kawali Group, the Rabab Ensemble, the Sitar Ensemble. So in the last 2 years, 2022, 2023, and now 2024, animated back at the global stage, very tall, very strong, very committed. But this time we're not just presenting the better side of Afghanistan, but still the better side of Afghanistan is this orchestra. But we're mainly involved in advocating, not only sharing the beauty of Afghan music, not only playing side by side by local musicians anywhere we travel to facilitate a people-to-people dialogue between our musician and their peers around the world. But we are mainly also advocating for the women's rights, for stopping gender apartheid in Afghanistan, for restoration of the music rights, and raising awareness about what's happening in Afghanistan. But we are back at the global stage.
Right. And you were back at World Orchestra Week just a month ago when you were one of a number of incredible youth orchestras that performed at Carnegie Hall. And it just shows what you've been able to achieve. It must have been a nightmare during that period when you weren't sure whether you could get everyone out. The danger to everyone's lives. I remember from seeing the news, there was a lot of shooting going on, a lot of disorder, even compared to the tyrannical regime that exists now. It looked as though simply walking out in the street might be a risk of getting shot. If someone got angry, didn't like the look of you, it could happen. So it's incredible that you were able to get out. It must have been an unbelievable ordeal. And I have to say that, it certainly is something I pray that the day will come when you're able to walk back into your country with your heads held high, with your instruments, and help to usher in a new dawn for your country after this horrendous nightmare. I also want to say, and this is not something that I often do, but I'm sure that our listeners, having heard this story, will want to support your work. The Friends of ANIM are a way, if you're in the Western world, that you can do it. They're a charity that you can donate to, I think based in the U.S. I've had the chance to meet with Leslie from Friends of ANIM, and we will post contact information below the notes for this show so that those of you who want to support Dr. Sarmast, his work, his students, his teachers, can do that and help keep this really glorious tradition alive for the future. You are the ark that will be preserving this for the future of generations, but also for our understanding of the vital role that music plays in making this the world we want to see, the world we want to live in. And without giving away too many details, because we haven't announced yet, but we are hoping about a year from now to welcome you and one or more of the ensembles to Toronto for a big event that we're working on, and we'll have more details at a later date.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful news, and we hope that we will be able to come to Canada to share the beauty of Afghan music with a positive and hopeful message, and to inspire and to give hope.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It was a pleasure. It was an honor to be with you and talking to you.
Thank you. And we'll stay in touch, as they say.
We will.
The Glenn Gould Foundation is a registered Canadian charity, and we rely on the support of arts lovers like you to keep bringing inspiring stories to life. Please consider giving by visiting our website, glengould.ca, and follow us across social media at the Glenn Gould Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Gould Standard.